Welcome to the Talk Fest, a blend of passion and movement arts, technology, and entrepreneurialism. Bringing new ideas to the world through engaging stories and guests designed to flip your world upside down. Introducing your host, the web slinger himself, Matthew Hissong.
Welcome to the Talk Fest. Today's guest is an extremely important guest. I say that about all my guests, actually. All of them are extremely important and extremely valuable. DianneParnell, our guest for today, though, brings a special layer of finesse in the way that we are talking about emotional trauma and how to overcome emotional trauma, how to identify emotional trauma, and what that does for you either in a negative way or in a positive way, and actually how that comes out into your life. So we talk about personal stories. Dianne shares some really vulnerable and extremely terrifying situations that she's been in. So really excited about today's episode. Let's dive right in. Welcome to the Talk Fest with your host, Web Slinger. I am so excited for this interview today. This is one of my good friends, DianneParnell, and she is an emotional trauma coach. And that even of itself may be a little bit triggering to you if you've never processed or dealt with some of the emotional trauma that you have in your past. So without further ado, Dianne, could you tell us a little bit more about your story and how you show up in the world?
All right. Well, I'll tell you the story. I started out as a holistic wellness practitioner, and I had a lot of stuff in my world, but I thought I dealt with it. So I just carried on, did my job and whatever. But what started to happen is my clients started telling me their stories. They started crying and just opening up on my table. And I thought, wow, I wasn't equipped to deal with that. And I didn't know how to help them properly. So that's when I started studying access consciousness and the emotional side of how our brain works and how that gets stored in our body. And through that process, I had to deal with my own stuff. And that was not fun, let me tell you. So I have that compassion when I'm dealing with my clients now, because I've been there and it's ugly and it can be painful. The good thing is it doesn't have to last forever, because we can take you through a process that's fairly quick. I mean, it's like layers of an onion. So you peel them off, and here's my story. Do you want to hear my story of what got me here? So when I started studying how emotions and the thought process stores in our body, I learned that I was storing a lot of anger. And I always thought the anger was towards my mom. And we had a really tumultuous, when I was a teenager growing up, and probably till I had my kids, but there was still that yuck there. And what came up was that I wasn't angry at my mom. I went through this process. So what happened is, when I was 18, I had a child, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, whether I wanted to keep this child, because I was bringing her into a really toxic environment. Her dad was a partier. He did drugs, all that kind of stuff. And our house was a party house. And so I was really conflicted about it, but I never really said anything to anybody. And this didn't come up for me until about, I don't know, maybe a year ago, that when I had my daughter, she was taken away right away. Which I thought, and I'd never had a baby, so I didn't know. I thought, yeah, they're just taking her to clean her up or whatever. But I never saw her again. And a social worker came into my room, and we had a chat. And she asked me what I wanted to do. And I said, I'm really conflicted. I want her with everything in my being. When I found out I was pregnant, I was over the moon happy. So she talked to me and chatted, and she had these papers with her. And she said, well, if you sign these papers, we can look after your daughter until such time as you decide what you want to do. Perfect, right? I was in the hospital. I was so emotionally unavailable for anybody at that time. And I thought, this is great. They'll take care of her. That will give me the time to sort of decompress and do whatever. So what happened is I signed the papers. And the very next day, like even before when she left, I thought, oh my God, what have I done? I want my daughter. I want her. I want to raise her. So I phoned her up the next day and I said, I've changed my mind. Oh, let's back up a bit. When I signed those papers, she told me I had 6 months to make a decision before an adoption would be final. So I thought, okay. So signed the papers, phoned her the next day and said, no, I want my daughter. I want to raise her. And she said, well, it's too late. It's a done deal. I said, what do you mean it's a done deal? And I'm on a payphone at this point. And she said, you signed the papers. And I said, you had 6 months before this adoption, before anything was final. And she laughed at me and she said, well, who do you think? Because I said, I'm taking you to court. I was so upset and so angry. I was all by myself. I didn't have a support team behind me. And she laughed and she said, well, who do you think they're going to believe? You, an 18-year-old, or me? And at that point, I shut down. I didn't talk about it. I didn't tell anybody about the conversation. And my in-laws, who would have been my in-laws, had said that we could move in with them and they would help us get going. And that didn't happen because they basically took my child. So I compartmentalized that, put it in a nice little box somewhere in my body. And it led to a completely different me. I had always been this bubbly, fun, open young girl. And I became this very angry, snarky. I had to be right about everything because that power had been taken away from me when I was young. And so when people got on my table and started telling me this stuff, I thought, no, I can't let them go through this. So it was a growing experience for me because I had to let go of my stuff in order to help them. And so I did. And a lot of stuff came up and it was like, wow, this is incredible stuff, because I didn't realize how much I had buried. 6 months after my daughter was born, her dad was killed in a motorcycle accident. So now I had lost a child. I had lost her father. It was like, wow, what do you do now? What do you do now? So I became very withdrawn. My mom wanted me to move back home and I said no, because I didn't want to be there. I didn't want anything to do with them because they weren't there for me. And it wasn't their fault because I didn't talk about it. I never said a word. So they didn't know what I was going through. It was just like life was back to normal, but it wasn't normal for me. I became somebody who I wasn't. I became a different person. And that's how I started working with people with the trauma. And that's only one of the traumas. I mean, there's a lot, but that one is probably the most impactful that I had because I realized I was angry at the social worker. I wasn't angry at my mom. I was angry at my mom because she wasn't there to support me, but I was really angry at the social worker for lying to me. And I thought, if this happened to me, how many other young girls has this happened to? That they have basically stolen your baby and have a nice life. Too bad, so sad.
Right. Yeah. And it's such an interesting point that you bring up too about not communicating and not bringing that out and how that locks into your body. I mean, what does that do? How is that going to accumulate? I mean, now that you've kind of processed that, you've kind of gone through it in some way, shape, or another, right? And help other people go through it. What does that kind of emotional trauma look like? Whether it's physical abuse, emotional abuse, this one was just a terrible situation in which you feel stuck and stagnant and it's done to you. What does that do to your voice? What does that do to your light and how you show up in the world?
That's a very good question because I didn't have a voice. You talked about your chakras there when we were in another conversation. My throat chakra was completely shut off because I didn't talk about it. I hid it. It was like it didn't happen. So for me, I just, like I said, I put it in this nice tiny box. I became sick Yeah. It was a pretty little box. It had bows, and I mean, I can describe it to you. It was like a little present that I had stuffed away in my body. So where it's stored for me is in my liver and in my lungs and in my throat. And those represent anger, rage for the liver, and the lungs is crying, grief. I've had trouble with my lungs. I don't anymore because I release that stuff, and I don't have trouble with my liver anymore for the same reason. Those emotions store in the cells of our body, and they can store in many, many places within our bodies. And I finally figured out after many years, when you go to the doctor and you say, I just don't feel good, there's something wrong, there's something wrong. And they do all the tests and they go, nope, there's nothing wrong in your body. I have declared from that those emotions are the ones that are making you sick, and a doctor can't deal with those. He can deal with something physical that's broken, or if your liver is toxic from whatever it is, they can deal with that, but they don't know how to retrieve those emotions. So, and even some, I don't know, because I've never been to actual counseling. But what I find is a lot of times when you go into therapy, you just keep looping. And nothing ever really comes of it. And so what I do is I talk to my clients, and we go specific about when the first time they felt the way they feel. Because I go in on a specific emotion. You fill out a huge sheet of paper with tons and tons of questions, and I look for things that you keep repeating. So it could be anything, like I feel so stupid, nobody listens to me, those kinds of things. And that's where we're going to go in, because I want to know when that started. Where did it start, and how old were you when it started? And then from there we kind of work from there, and then we come forward. And it's quite deep, and it can be painful, but for the most part, once you release that, it's like a huge sigh. It's like, oh, because when I realized that I was angry at the social worker, I could deal with that, because I didn't know why I was so angry before that, because I'd stuffed it down. I was just angry all the time. And I actually wrote an article about being the queen of snark, because that was me. A friend of mine had written an article called Snark. And when I read it, it was like, whoa, she's talking, that's me. She's talking about me. And so I took snippets of that article and I started writing about my story, about being the queen of snark, because I was not a nice person, because I was angry all the time. And carried that into my marriage until I finally realized that, you know what, I need to deal with this, or my life is going to implode again.
Oh, that's such a good sequence of events, and how you were able to overcome that and really set you up in a proper position to help other people through it as well. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I would like to dive into it. One of the things that I've noticed is it's almost like the mind can only take so much. It's a little box or a cup. Once it's filled that cup up, it starts overflowing, and it overflows into Pandora's box. And whether that shows up in your shoulders, I was just writing a short story about a friend who had died. And it was odd how after I had actually gone through that journey and almost opened up those wounds again, opened up Pandora's box and explored those emotions and actually let them hit me, let the gravity of the situation be understood, I noticed my shoulders kind of like relax a little bit, my lungs, like you're saying, it's interesting how your body is the overflow of your mind. And as a massage therapist, as a fellow massage therapist, I really understood that, helping and dealing with clients and through their injuries and stuff like that. So you kind of mentioned this weight that you carry with this emotional baggage, and maybe forgiveness for other people who have like that venom of not forgiving them. Mm-hmm. What are the negative ramifications of carrying around that weight, right? Because you can be strong enough to carry around that weight, and it's not an issue until it becomes an issue.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. The thing, there's a lot of people, because I talk about forgiveness when I'm working with clients, and a lot of them are still at that point where they're so angry and they see forgiveness as saying that person, I need to forgive them because you forget it and they didn't do anything to you. That's not what forgiveness is about at all. It's forgiving the act so that you can move on, because the other person who's hurt you quite often has already moved on. And they're living their life, but we get stuck in that we're not forgiving them because they did something terrible, but we get stuck. And sometimes that affects our health. So when you're forgiving someone, you're allowing yourself to let go of that trauma. It doesn't mean that you have to become buddy with them and go have dinner with them let them out of your life completely. It's just that you are allowing yourself that opportunity to grow and to become something that you need to be, that you've not allowed to happen because you're carrying that judgment and you're carrying that, I'm never forgiving that person because what they did was horrible. Yes, absolutely, it was horrible. But you're the one that's now stuck. And it's stuck in your body somewhere, and it will show up. It'll either show up in your actions, in your health. It shows up in many, many ways, many, many ways.
Yeah. I think the best analogy that I could come up with in that regard is, so you've been wounded, you've been cut by something. If you just leave it alone and do nothing, it's going to get infected and it's going to get worse. And it's possibly going to take your entire arm and go up to the shoulder if you don't chop off the arm.
Yep.
So what you have to do is you have to go home and you have to pour alcohol on it and just cleanse that, just rip that wound back open essentially, but clean it out, get all that negativity, all that junk out. It's like, okay, yes, but you are not defined. Yes, this happened to you. Okay, but move on from it. You've got to understand the gravity of it, not forget that the situation happened.
That's right.
But one of the things that you brought up a while ago, and I'll probably take this quote with me till the day I die, is hurt people hurt people.
Hurt people. Yeah.
It's from DianneParnell, unless she tells me that she found it from
I think somebody else wrote it, but when I heard it, it was like, oh, whoa. Yeah, I was a hurt person and I was hurting people. So yeah, we do, because it's a mechanism, it's a coping mechanism that helps us get through life, but it's not really helping us get through life. It's keeping us stuck. It's like wearing chains. It's like wearing chains, and every time you walk, you're like this robot because you're carrying this stuff with you. I remember, and this is kind of a funny story, but when, before my husband and I got married, his buddies had a party for him or whatever, and they chained him to his chair at work. They made these shackles or whatever, and they chained like a ball and chain, right? And it was funny because he finally, he phoned me and he says, like, I can't go anywhere. They left me here, right? And I kind of started to laugh and I went, wow. I said, is that the way you guys see marriage, is like a ball and chain, And he goes, no, not at all. And it just got me thinking. And I thought, wow, because that seems to be the thing. They lock these guys up or they do these things to them, right? And it's like, okay, I need to look at this. But it's the same with forgiveness. You're carrying that chain and that ball with you forever if you don't forgive whatever has happened to you. And it's so toxic that when you can release that, it allows you to let go of that emotion. And what I do is, when they release that negativity, we always fill it up with something positive. Always. Because when you take something out of your body that's negative or toxic or whatever it is, you have to fill that space up, or it's going to fill up with more garbage. So we fill it up with whatever that person needs. It's always different. It's love, it's compassion, it's bright lights. You can fill it with whatever you want. I had one lady that filled it up with sparkles. because when she thought of that, it took her back to a childhood memory that was sparkles all over the place, and it made her super happy. So we filled that space up with sparkles. And yeah, and she carried on. And so every time she went into that space where she was going backwards, she would think of the sparkles, and it would bring her out of that, and she was able to move forward. One other thing I do want to say, though, is lots of times you'll hear people say that you can't express your emotions. You have to be happy all the time. And I don't agree with that at all. What I do tell my clients is that if you're feeling that emotion, you need to feel it. You need to be there and sit with it and be angry or be sad, whatever it is. It's how long you stay there that then becomes the issue. So if you feel that emotion, feel it full on, cry, yell, scream, do whatever you have to do, and then take a look at that, and then bring in the positivity and the light and say, oh, wow, that was brutal, but feel it. And I think that's what happens a lot of times is people stuff it because they think they need to be happy all the time.
Yeah. That's such a good point. Dianne, I feel like I could talk with you about so many different subjects. And so I want to be very guarded with where I go with my questions.
Yep.
I want to really dive into, at least in today, I'm going to bring you back, of course. I want to go into, and this kind of ties into your last point, unhealthy versus healthy coping mechanisms. And how do you establish that home base of, going through an existential crisis, dealing with death, dealing with emotion, dealing with stress? How do you come back to that like baseline? And how do you deal with maybe identifying unhealthy coping mechanisms, or what is a healthy coping mechanism to begin with? How do we come back to home base?
That's a really good question. And I think it's different for everybody. I have a friend who lived in her little black box forever and a day. She had curtains on the windows, flowers in vases, like it was like a little house.
It was embroidered, and little curtain.
Yeah, everything. And she really struggled to come out of that box. She's still there a little bit, but I think what happens is you have to establish that baseline, what works for you. For me, it might be up here. For you, it might be down here. But you and don't compare yourself to anybody else. Like, oh, she went to see Dianne and now she's all happy, happy, joy, joy, and I'm still down here. It's because you still have more to work on. So don't beat yourself up about
onion layers.
Oh man, there's so many layers. I mean, I do this for a living, and I have someone that I work with because I could be working with a client that will trigger me and go, oh, whoa, that's something I need to look at. But at least now I know that, okay, that's a trigger. We need to go and look at that. And through talking and processing and stuff, you will figure out what those triggers are for you. It's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight, but you're going to understand that when something happens, you go, oh, okay, I need to look at that. That could possibly be a trigger. And there's tools that you can use for that. And one of the ones I love the most is, who does this belong to? So when you're triggered, that's my go-to is I'll sit and stop and go, oh, okay, this is what I'm feeling. Who does that belong to? If you get a feeling in your gut like you've just been punched, pretty good chance it doesn't belong to you. So you can now return that energetic blueprint back to where it came from. So the whole process is, who does this belong to? If you get that feeling, I return this to sender with consciousness attached. And what that does is it's sending back the energetic blueprint that you have taken on from that other person. And those can be things like if you're overweight and people have told you that you're fat, if only you were skinny, you'd be so pretty if, and we all have heard that at some point in our life in some different form or another. That does not belong to you. Most of us take it on and we struggle with weight, or we struggle with, not going out without our makeup on our face, or whatever it is. You guys, you have to all be buff, or whatever it is. It doesn't matter what it is. But the thing is who does that belong to? Why do you feel the need that you have to go out with everything intact, be beautiful all the time, be happy all the time? You don't have to be. It's how you show up, and acknowledge that. And if it doesn't belong to you, return it back. It doesn't belong to you. You're allowing that other person to choose differently energetically. You're not actually going up and saying, hey, Matthew, this doesn't belong to me and you need to deal with it. You're not doing that. You're doing it on an energetic level. And we all know that we're electrical beings and energy, right? So that goes out to the universe. And sometimes, believe it or not, when we ask that question, who does it belong to? It could be someone that we don't even know, but it's something that they've struggled with and you're picking it up.
Wow. And I always love this little saying. It's called wabi sabi in Japanese. It is perfectly imperfect. It's embracing the imperfections, because those are your uniqueness. Those are your talents. Those are where your humanness, your unique energy is brought out. And we have this infatuation with being perfect all the time, but it's like, it's okay being imperfect, because your traumas, your experiences, your adventures, your troubles, your things that you struggle with can actually help you become stronger in a lot of ways and really overcome hurdles, help other people like you've done. Yeah. What is one takeaway before we wrap up here that you would like people to really grab and take away and explore their uniqueness, embrace their dark patches so that they can find that light? I
think you just said it really well. And because we need to acknowledge who we are and what we are and what's holding us back. And and being okay with that. You know, for years, I'm going to tell a little bit of a story here, because for years, when I was first acknowledging that I was in this funk, I bought so many self-help books. Like, I spent thousands of dollars on trying to fix me. And my husband said to me one day, he said, why are you reading all those books? He said, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. And in that instant, I kind of looked at him and I went, you know what? You're right. I'm not broken. I do need help to deal with some of this stuff, but we're not broken. Circumstances have put us in these situations, and we're the only one that can get us out of that situation. So number one is acknowledging that you're not happy, you're angry, whatever it is. It doesn't matter what that is, but first acknowledging it, that that's how you feel. And then the second step is, what do I do about it? Where do I go? So start seeking out people. I had this conversation with a lady the other day about coaching, because people think that if they're going to a coach, there's something wrong with them. They're broken in some way. And that's not the case at all. They're not broken. They just need help. I have a coach. I have someone that I work with. And it goes the same for counseling. People think if they go to a counselor, they're messed up, that there's something wrong with their mind. That's not true at all. We all need help processing. Everybody, I don't care who you are, everybody needs help processing things. We all go through trauma. You mentioned a car accident with a friend. That's a trauma. You weren't physically involved in the accident, but that's a trauma to your body. I had a baby who was premature. That was trauma to my whole family. And we needed to deal with that trauma. So it doesn't matter what it is. I could go out and fall down now and skin my knee. Actually, I'm going to tell you a story about skinning my knee. Sorry to take this, but I walked down, we live up quite a steep hill, and it's a dirt road. And I had my sandals on, and I was walking down to meet a friend one day, and they had paved part of they put a skirt on the road. And where the skirt started, there was rocks, and I hit the rocks and slid, went down on my knee, wrecked my ankle and my knee. And I was sitting on the ground when my girlfriend came around the corner, and she said, I thought you were sitting there just waiting for me. And I said, are you serious? Sitting on the road? So I got up, and she looked at me, because I could hardly walk. It was so painful. And so she cleaned me up, and away we went to do what we did. And interestingly enough, we were sitting downtown having coffee, and a few people walked by, saw my foot, and said, oh, can I run Reiki on you? So they did Reiki sessions on me right in the downtown core, which was awesome. But what happened is, about a month after I had healed, I walked down the same road. And when I got to that spot where I had fallen, my whole body stopped, and I was vibrating.
Oh.
I was vibrating and I'm thinking, oh my God, I can't even move. And I couldn't move. My body was so traumatized. And so I sat there and I went, oh, wow, who does this belong to? And I had to sit there and do some of my processes and release that trauma. And I did. And now I can walk down the road and it doesn't affect me. But I was totally frozen in that spot. Yeah. It was probably 10, 15 minutes.
Crazy. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Dealing with all those traumas and everything. Oh my gosh. Dianne, thank you so much for the conversation. We always have excellent conversations, and I'm really glad that I was able to get you on the show here. Where can we find you? Where do we follow you and social media?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram, Facebook under my name, DianneParnell is my business page. I have a website that hopefully it's up and running. It's not quite finished, which is DianneParnell.com. And that's it.
Perfect.
That's it. Yeah. You can find me there and definitely add me. I'm happy to chat and yeah.
Perfect.
This has been awesome, Matthew.
I really appreciated it. And you guys take care, okay? Bye.
Awesome. Bye.
Hopefully you enjoyed that episode with Dianne Parnell. I know she dropped a lot of nuggets. Hopefully you can take those out into your life and apply them to make your life better, to improve your awareness of any issues or emotional traumas that could be causing some issues in your life. Hope you're enjoying the Talk Fest. Please reach out to Dianne Parnell. Give her some love on social media. If you want to follow me, my web slinger, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. Take care, you guys. And remember, inspiration is free. Pass it on.